Shri Gurubhyo Namaha Harihi Om Krishnam Vande Mantapashadaram Divyarbhakakrutim Shika Bandhatrayopetam Bhaishmi Madvakararchitam. Subject is Scientific Interpretation of Nahusha's Rule in Heaven, Nahusha's Infatuation on Indrani, Curse of Sage Agastya, and the Return of Indra to Heaven. Let's run through the summary of story. Bruhaspatiacharya disappears due to Indra's negligence. Indra kills Vishwarupa, understanding his partiality to demons. Indra kills Vritrasura from Vajrayudha made of sage Dadichi's bones. The above stories were interpreted scientifically in our last three explanations. And now let's see the continuation of those stories through this fourth explanation. While Indra hides in the lotus duct of Manasa Sarovara in the northeast direction, Nahusha rules heaven with the help of his knowledge and meditation power. Turning dumb with arrogance of riches, Nahusha declares himself as Indra and asks Indrani to unite his short component or Vamanga. Indrani, when conveys this message with grief to Bruhaspatiacharya, he advises Indrani to ask Nahusha to come to her on the palanquin carried by sages. Accepting this, Nahusha comes on the palanquin carried by sage Agastya and others. As he forces the sages to move fast, touching them by his feet, threatening a snake, sage Agastya curses Nahusha to fall into the category of horizontal growing animal species snakes. During that time, Indra worships Lord Shri Hari to overcome his Brahmatya dosha, and sages brings him back to heaven. Worshipping Lord Shri Hari, all his sins were destroyed and Indra started to shine like sun. Let's interpret this story from physiological point of view. Nahusha ruling heaven in the absence of Indra. Even without Indra, the heaven has to be functional. That means even in the immune deficiency state, the body has to be functional. There is a complement system to immune system, and it has two important pathways, classical pathway and alternative pathway. Classical pathway serves as bridge between innate and adaptive immunity. Classical pathway gets activated through antigen antibody immune complex. The functioning and regulation of classical pathway is Indrani. The one who belongs to the same race is called as Nahusha. That means the activation and functioning of alternative pathway in complement system of immunity is Nahusha. The alternative pathway requires specific types of compounds for activation and doesn't require antigen antibody interactions. The alternative pathway is capable of autoactivation because of the process called takeover of C3. Nahusha claiming himself as Indra and asking Indrani to unite his short component or Vamanga. Complement system kills pathogens with natural killer cells when C3 convertase happens and continues till C5 convertase. This is an intricate explanation, and hence let's see the picture to understand it. In the center of the picture, there is a chart explaining the functional stage of classical and alternative pathway. Please look into the picture. Under classical pathway, there is a micro block, and beneath the block, there is C1 protein complex and IgG antibody. When microbes are detected in classical pathway, with C1 protein complex and immunoglobulin interactions, IgG antibody is produced. Then C1 further leads to development of C4 and C2 components. C4 component leads to C4b and C2 component leads to 2a. C4b and 2a together makes C3 convertase. C3 leads to C3b and C3a. C4b, 2a and C3a together makes C5 convertase. At every stage, classical pathway requires IgG antibody, without which it cannot be functional. In classical pathway, IgG antibody will be produced when the immune system is intact. That means Indrani is active and functional only when Indra is available. Now let's look onto alternative pathway. Under alternative pathway, there is a micro block, and with binding of complement protein C3, it develops C3b. C3b together with BB forms C3 convertase. C3 leads to C3b and C3a. C3b, BB and C3b leads to C5 convertase. This is what we can understand from the picture. C3 C5 convertase in alternative pathway happens without antigen antibody interactions. This is the knowledge and meditation power of Nahusha. That means C3 C5 convertase happens without IgG antibody. C3 C5 convertase that happens through shortcut without C1 C2 C2a and C4 C4a is short component of Nahusha or Vamanga. Without Indra, Nahusha declares himself as Indra. That means C3 C5 convertase happens without IgG antibody, which will be produced only when immune system is intact or Indra being in heaven. Nahusha asks Indrani to unite his short component or Vamanga means. C3 C5 convertase happens without intact immune system. Hence, alternative pathway considers itself as immune system and asks classical pathway to unite its short component or Vamanga of C3 C5 convertase to present pathogens to natural killer cells. The discussion of Indrani Brihaspatiacharya and curse of sage Agastya. As adaptive immunity was destroyed by Indra killing Vishwarupa, Indrani, the activation and functioning of classical pathway, informs Brihaspatiacharya, who regulates and controls the functioning of innate immune response, that Nahusha, the activation and functioning of alternative pathway, is asking to unite his short component C3 C5 convertase. Classical pathway to unite short component of alternative pathway is a functional change, and it has to come from brain stimulus, and hence Brihaspatiacharya advises Indrani to ask Nahusha to come in the palanquin carried by sage Agastya and others. When alternative pathway becomes hyperactive instead of being low active, it gets cursed by sage Agastya. Agastya is the one who moves the immovable. Agastya moves out the immovable Nahusha from heaven and brings in the immovable Indra from lotus duct of Manasa Sarovara to heaven. That means the alertness of classical pathway enables the brain stimulus to deactivate alternative pathway and brings in the original immune system in intact condition. From the curse of sage Agastya, Nahusha falls into the species of snakes. That means among most of the living beings, C3 and C5 proves to be defensive in nature. But in one species of living being, it works as offensive or aggressive to make the prey unconscious. That animal species is nothing but dangerous snakes. C3 C5 is found in the venom or poison of those dangerous snakes. This fantastic story of Purana not only gives us moral lesson but also reveals profound science related to classical pathway and alternative pathway of complement system in immune system. It was Shri Madhvacharya who explained the essence and sanctity of Puranas. In fact, the works of Sri Vedavyasa stands as citations for the entire gamut of science, provided we interpret and understand them properly. With this, we now have come round the full circle of immune system, covering innate immunity, adaptive immunity, reconstitution of immunity through bone marrow transplant, classical pathway and alternative pathway of complement system. Finally, with prayers to Sri Madhvacharya and his indweller Lord Sri Krishna to bestow the determination and ability to learn more divine engineering within us and around us, I am signing off. Thank you. Krishna Arpanamastu. Krishnam Vande Jagadgurum.